So these are going to be the best decks after the patch notes, and the first one is going to be Curse Implock or Normal Implock. They both run very similarly and have similar win rates, so they'll both be in the description, but the idea behind this deck is pretty simple. You got insane early game with the Imp package, and then you have the direct damage with Curses to basically finish off almost any matchup. The idea early game is Flame Imp or Librarian, Vile Library turn 2, then Fiendish Circle turn 3, and you can do upwards of 15 to 20 damage by turn 4, depending on what your opponent's able to do about these early game minions, and that's something that most classes cannot come back from. And if that somehow isn't enough, or you get a bad start, you can finish them off with a couple of curses that stack up over time, and again, there's just not much your opponent can do unless they keep their hand full at all times, but if they do, they're not playing cards to get rid of your board. The next deck on the list is going to be Evolved Shaman, which had one of the highest increases in win rates of any of the other decks after the buffs and nerfs, and I think it's because without Miracle Rogue as well as Quest Demon Hunter destroying you by turn 6, the extra 1 or 2 turns you consistently get allow you to get giant tiny toy plays with the Convincing Disguise, gives you time to play that Glug and scale it up, as well as make use of giant minions you get off of Goldshire Knoll along with the Muck Pools. So the nerfs to those really fast decks gives the Evolved Shaman just enough time to snowball, high roll, and win a whole bunch of games. So the next deck on the list is going to be Pure Paladin, which is the #1 deck I recommend whenever anybody asks me what deck should I play if I'm new or want to grind to Legend. And the reason is there were really 3 reasons. 1, very simple to play. You just play tempo, which means you just do the most mana efficient thing every single turn. And because of the fact that most of your minions and stuff have Divine Shield, or you can give them Divine Shield, you're able to make trades that otherwise wouldn't always be the best as you learn the mechanics of the game. It's also fairly aggressive, so you just usually hit them in the face anyway. Next is the fact that the win rate is like the 2nd or 3rd highest win rate in the game right now, according to Hearthstone Replay. So it's just objectively a really strong deck. And as people experiment more, this deck will remain strong for the next week until other things become optimized. And then last is it's fairly inexpensive. You don't need the Lightblade for sure, and you mostly don't need Cariel Roam. You can run Seafloor Savior or the Argent Protector for some pumps as well as early game tempo, and it'll still work out very well. The next deck on the list is going to be Beast Hunter, which has been out of the spotlight for a while because Shockspitter Hunter's been the best hunter deck for several weeks now, but since that's been nerfed as well as several other things, this is in prime position to become the best hunter deck again. In fact, one of the best decks in the game. And the reason is because look at this curve. You have really good early game package, a lot of 1, 2s, and 3s, a decent mid game package with 4, 5s, and 6s, which you don't have as many cards, but they're all very strong, and then insane late game with several big cards that you can play to finish off the game. And overall, the deck is just good because it's never weak at any stage of the game. You always have a chance. You can be like, oh, I lost early game, but if I can make it to this Mountain Bear, I can stabilize and then win the game with like King Crush later, or something along those lines. Or if you're playing against a combo deck, you can win the game with this insane early game pressure. Overall, it's a great deck. It's very expensive though, so only craft it if you have a ton of dust. And let's jump into the next one. The next deck on the list is going to be Big Spell Mage, which until recently was kind of flying under the radar, even though the win rate on this deck was really good. And the idea behind the deck is you just want to survive the early game with a ton of 1, 2, 3, and 4 drops. And then you want to somehow, after turn 5, switch modes into playing a ton of big spells for cheap. You've got Belinda, you got Barbaric Sorceress, and then all of these big spells and Mordresh and Magister that just scale really, really well into the mid and late game. So overall, this deck is just survive the early game, get one of these 3 cards to cheat out one of these, and then you just win. The next deck on this list is a little bit surprising, but that's Spell Demon Hunter, without the quest. And this deck used to be insanely good until they nerfed the Relic of Dimensions. Then people switched over to Quest Demon Hunter, but once that was nerfed along with Miracle Rogue and the meta slowed down a little bit, all of a sudden, even this nerfed Spell Demon Hunter is one of the faster decks in the format right now. And you still have the same damage. It runs very similarly to how it used to. You got Silvermoon Arcanist with things like the Fel Barrage, as well as Mark of Scorn, and even Unleash Fel. You got the ability to win late game with Jace and Artificer Zymox, as well as having a ton of mana cheat with the Relic of Dimensions and a lot of draw. So overall, the deck is very similar to how it used to run. It's just better now because everything around it got worse. So these last 4 decks are kind of the dark horse prediction decks that don't have the stats to back them up right now, but I think they will become very strong. And the first one's going to be Enrage Warrior. Enrage Warrior is a deck that has been pretty good for a while, just people aren't playing it. Like, I played it, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago and went 8-4 or something along those lines. And even though that's not insane and it's a fairly small sample size, it shows this deck has potential. And it was losing to things like Miracle Rogue and Demon Hunter that was popping off as early as turn 5. Now that those have been nerfed, and the meta is going to slow down, and I think Ramp Druid will become pretty rampant soon, you're able to take advantage of them with the Enrage Warrior, as well as fight for board with the Imbued Axe, which gives a lot of your things a ton of extra stats. It also wants you to trade in, so you make your minions damage, so you can activate some of their abilities. And overall, I think a more board-based meta that is a little bit slower is the perfect spot for Enrage Warrior to be. Next we have Frost Death Knight, which did get a little hurt with the Glacial Advance not giving you as much mana cheat, but overall it's still the same deck. I mean, you're gonna have almost the same amount of burst potential. I will admit, since the meta is slowing down a little bit and Ramp Druid might become more popular and gain a ton of armor, same with like Control Warrior, this deck might struggle a little bit, so it is kind of meta dependent. But if those decks don't become as popular as I'm predicting, Frost Death Knight will most definitely be a solid deck. I mean, again, the damage is there. It's not really changing that much. I guess it became a little bit slower, but you are usually overkilling your opponents anyway. So I think this deck still has the potential to be the best Death Knight deck in the game right now, but maybe not. I don't know. The next deck on the list is going to be Control Warrior, which has been a huge surprise to me. I've played it basically every day since the patch went live, and I have loved it. It's got good disruption with Theatar, as well as the disruptive Spellbreaker, and even Call to the Stand. You've got good burst potential because Astalar to the front and Bran, the pumped up Astalar version, the 8 mana one, is 28 damage on turn 10 for 9 mana, which is a surprising amount of burst a lot of people aren't really expecting. You got other ways of pressuring the board with Captain Galvangar, Nelly, and Rukara. You've got solid removal with Brawl and Shield Shatter, single target removal as well with the Shield Slam. I just think that this deck has the potential to be very good. It's got answers and can win against most matchups. Even combo decks, you have the disruption to sometimes win if you get lucky with what you end up hitting. So overall, if you want to play this deck, I would highly recommend it. I've played a couple of different builds. This is the one that I've liked the most though. It'll be in the description, but I have 1 or 2 other videos about Control Warrior. You can check those out as well for a different deck list. The next deck on the list is going to be OTK Naval Mine Warlock, which I'm very confused about where to put it on this list, because on the one hand, I think it is now the fastest combo deck in the game, and I think it will dominate High Legend. That being said, I think that it's pretty hard to play, so people who aren't at the highest level of play will mess up a lot with it, and at lower ranks, people are playing more aggressive and tempo decks, which this deck could struggle against, right? It struggles, like I said, against Paladin, which is going to be a very popular deck in the meta, as well as maybe even Enrage Warrior if you get a couple of big pumps. This deck just doesn't have the removal to deal with big, wide boards like that. So it really comes down to how familiar you are with the deck and how the meta ends up shaping up. But I think this deck has the potential to be either insane or like good at the very least. And last but not least, we have Control Paladin. This is a deck that is honestly just a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I mean, Carriol is a good way to stall out, especially if other people are playing more board-based decks. If people start running Rustrot Viper more frequently, this could end up being a little bit weaker. We'll have to see what people do. But you have the OTK potential with Mr. Smite, another board wipe with Anachronos that can buy you a couple of turns, and then you still got the same early and mid-game tempo that Paladin is really known for. You got a lot of 1, 2, 3, and 4 drops that can help you solidify the board and control it a little bit. So overall, this deck has also been surprising. I would recommend playing it, but since it's very expensive, if you want to play Paladin, just play tempo, unless you really want to play this deck.